All right, welcome back. Once again, this is Brian with the Aesthetic Fanatic, brought to you by Kress Sons, specializing in historic preservation and restoration in St. Joseph, Missouri. This is episode 5, Sanding and Smoothing. We're going to go back over all the spots that we have gesso'd and spackled and filled in and whatnot, and finally smooth those off so they're going to be ready to be touched up. Hello again, and so it's the next day and the spackling has all dried and done any shrinking it was going to do, and so now we can take a look and see what we're up against as far as smoothing this out. Here's one of those little repairs, and this is how it looks dried. You can see it's not real smooth, it's kind of jaggedy. So we're going to have to apply a little bit of sandpaper. I'm going to show you how we do that very carefully, not to disrupt any more of the gold gild than necessary. And here's that big repair. It's kind of the same way. It's a little rough, but some sandpaper and a sanding block to make sure we stay perfectly flat, and also some strategic lancing of high spots is what we're going to have to do. And also we're going to get out the soap and water again and clean some of these areas where I got a little spackling on the rest of the piece. And there's a good example right there. That'll wipe right off with warm water. No soap this time, just warm water, a sponge. And we'll clean all that up too. Did not mean to make any mess, as you know, but it just happens sometimes, so you got to keep it under control. So it'll be interesting to see how smooth this all comes with light sanding, lancing, and sponging. And one of the techniques I came up with involves a little piece of a dowel rod. I just cut that off. It's about 3 inches long. And a piece of 220 grit sandpaper. What I'm going to do is just wrap that sandpaper, again one-handed here as I film, around that very tightly. And of course I'll use 2 fingers. But then we'll go over to the piece, and where we've gotten spackling in the cove, you see the shape of that very bottom cove of the molding, we need to be able to get right in there and conform to the roundness, and just do some minor sanding back and forth. Let me see. To see if we can smooth out our spackle. So I'll do a little bit more offline here in a second, but essentially we just very lightly follow the shape of the cove back and forth to get rid of the spackling and try not to disrupt any of the other gold. Alright, so here we are with the putty knife. Again, I've cleaned it up, at least the edges of it, as good as possible, because you don't want to be making any more mess than you already have. And what we're going to do first is take the putty knife, and we're just going to run it along the edge where we made this repair and spackling and get that to knock off all the high spots. So here we go. And I'm going to do this very carefully. Again, no additional damage is always the goal. And you can see that it's taken quite a bit of what we put in place, and it didn't take much of anything else. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing along the bottom and knock off all those high spots, lance them off. Alright, then what I'm going to do is take my sponge, and nothing but warm water this time, same soft sponge, wring it out real good, and I'm going to go over that spot I just lanced. And this actually will, to some degree, work as sandpaper too. It won't take off a lot of the spackling, but it will smooth it off a little bit, so that's always good. We'll smooth it because it's a lot gentler than sandpaper. Okay, cut. Alright, so we're going to do a little more sanding on this. Again, this is a perfect opportunity to use the little jig I showed you earlier, which is the dowel rod, and the paper's just as tightly as you can get it wrapped around there. And we're going to go into this big repair here, right into the cove, and kind of sand back and forth. Show them a little bit closer there, Cal. There you go. I'm going to sand back and forth in that cove very gently to try to smooth out all that excess spackling that's in the way of the shape. Alright, so let me get in here, get in as close as I can, and I try to get their dowel rested right in the cove, and then I just go back and forth like this, just over my spot, and try to not touch anything else. And that's how you do it. You probably have to take it away and look at it a couple times, see how it looks, then go back in. You can also blow away your excess, because you don't want that to become, that starts acting like sandpaper in and of itself if you start moving around the dust too much. Alright, Cal, you can cut. Okay, so here we're going to do some sanding on that frieze along the top of the same repair. I just took a block of wood out of my junk pile, but it does have a flat surface on it. That's all I care about. Wrap my sandpaper around it, again, as tightly as I can, and then I'm just going to go onto that flat surface with the block and sand that back and forth. Just smooth it off and try to get the lines as crisp as you can get them. Alright. And then last, I'm going to do one more. And now what are you doing? Oh. And now that I've sanded that both in the cove and on the frieze of the molding, I'm going to get my sponge, wring it out, and just go in here and go over that with the sponge, clean up excess, and get a real good look at where we're at. Now you can see that repair turned out really well. That little spot there is still a tiny recess, and we could elect to put a little more spackling in there if we want to, but you know, I don't know if I'm even going to worry about that. So the last thing I'm going to do is go across the top of this where all these little repairs were made and spackled, and just clean them up. Take the sponge, keep moving the sponge so you're always on a clean part of the sponge. Wring it out when you're worried that you might not be. Sponge it all clean, get rid of all the excess. Okay. Alright, that's it for episode 5, sanding and smoothing. I want to give a special shout out to Calvin for his handy camera work earlier in the program. It made it much easier for me to get work done and for you to see what was happening. So I think we're going to enlist him more in the near future. Also, look out for episode 6, which will be coming down the pipe in a minute, after I do the work, of course. But that will be the touch-up phase. So I think we'll do touch-ups to the repairs we've already done, and